do you and I, as responsible adults, have the freedom and the human dignity to determine for ourselves what is true, what is false, what is good information, what is misinformation, what is hateful, what is not hateful, what is right, what is wrong? Do we not have, in a free society, you're an adult, you get to decide that. In a repressive regime or totalitarian state, the government decides on your behalf, for your own good, of course, to protect you from really bad ideas, to protect you from misinformation. So, it's always a good pretext. We have to save the people from misinformation, or we have to save the people from hurt feelings or from hatred. And this is where Canada's federal government is going.
Again, I don't know how to explain that to people who don't fundamentally understand it. If you don't understand how important what is happening right now is, I would say you probably never will.
The really big issue is, do people understand freedom? Do they love freedom? Do they cherish freedom? Do they actually want to live in a free society? Freedom exists ultimately in the human heart, the human mind, the human spirit. So 3-page letter, and we talk about how this violates the Charter of Mobility Rights, which is Charter Section 6, which is the right to freely enter and leave Canada. So it's not North Korea, but it certainly is a partial violation that the government is now saying, sure, you can leave Canada, but if you return, you're going to be subjected to a $2,000 fee for getting forcibly, involuntarily locked up somewhere. That's a serious impediment on your freedom to travel, compared to, say, a more minor impediment where they say, well, we want you to take a COVID test when you land in Canada, and you have to quarantine at home for 14 days. Those are also violations of charter freedoms, but on a much smaller scale. So in our letter, we talk about how this violates the Charter of Mobility Rights, and it violates the charter freedom to be free from arbitrary imprisonment, the right to counsel, and other legal rights that you typically have if you're accused of a crime. And here the crime seems to be a Canadian that's going to come back to Canada seems to be the crime in question, but you don't have the same rights that you do if you're actually accused of a crime. So we explain that to the federal government, and we talk about how this is unnecessary. In our view, there's no justification for it. And then we warn that if these policies are pushed ahead, then we will sue. And that leads me to a last but very significant point, is that people have been arrested and detained and locked up without this policy even being in force, which is, again, that's the hallmark of a repressive regime where law is kind of invented on the fly by the health minister, the prime minister, the president. In a repressive regime, laws are not duly passed by Parliament and reviewed by the elected representatives of the people through a lengthy process, and it's lengthy on purpose. So we have deliberation, we have debate, we have the opposition parties have an opportunity to put forward amendments, which even if rejected, at least we had debate. And then you have the second reading, third reading, royal assent, and eventually proclaimed into force. And there's a reason we have that long, lengthy, cumbersome process. It's to protect the rights and freedoms of people, and it's also to ensure that we have the best possible laws as a result of informed debate and debate over time and debate with public input. What we have now is, and it's frightening at the provincial level as well in the Canadian provinces, the provincial governments, they write laws on the fly. And we have government by news conference, and we have the chief medical officer announces, oh, restaurants open, restaurants closed, restaurants open, restaurants closed, gyms open, gyms closed, churches shut entirely, churches limited to capacity, schools open, schools closed. There's no democracy. This is a medical dictatorship when you have no input from the federal parliament, the elected MPs, and on the provincial level, you've got the MLAs. They have some indirect behind the scenes say, I suppose, but there's no democracy. So that's the other big point on this, is that people have been arrested and detained even in the absence of any policy that has been duly elected that might have the force of law. So on that basis alone, all of these detentions are illegal.
And that brings us, I guess, to the latest developments in this story, because as you note, and again, I'll link up the news release that apparently the Trudeau government is delaying its plan to enact this policy. But of course, that comes with two major caveats. The first being, as you say, people have already been detained. So clearly this is already being enacted regardless of the policy. And secondly, from my reading of the media coverage of this story, it seems to be, at least the way they are framing it, that this is essentially a little bit of a delay so that the airlines will have time to repatriate the snowbirds and everyone will have a chance to get back to Canada before they start the mandatory quarantine, something along those lines. But it seems, from the media coverage at any rate, that this is going ahead. It's just a question of a couple of weeks.
Well, I think the process may have unfolded. This is speculation on my part, but I think that the Prime Minister Trudeau and the political advisors decided that this was a good idea and perhaps didn't get proper legal review. And now it's like, Prime Minister, we have this thing in Canada known as the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and its purpose is to protect citizens from government. And you can't just, have a news conference and declare something into being. So maybe they're looking at it more from a legal or charter perspective, and they're having their Justice Department review it. But even then, if they proceed with this, they will have to answer for it in court, because the big question is, why should Canadians not be allowed to quarantine at home? Why are we using the notoriously unreliable and inaccurate PCR tests that the government insists on? And, in the bigger context as well, you've got international travelers purportedly responsible for, 1% of the 1 or 2% of the COVID spread. So why is this a problem? I mean, sick people generally don't travel. There are exceptions. I suppose you could, maybe you're feeling sick, but you want to hop on a plane to see a dying parent that lives in another province or another country. But generally, if you're feeling sick, you've got your health insurance and you cancel your flight, you don't go. And then there's another big scientific issue there, which is that of asymptomatic spread. The federal and provincial governments, and I think most governments in the world, most of the lockdown policies are based on the notion that people who are not sick, people without symptoms, that they are dangerous spreaders. And so we all have to live in fear. We all have to behave as though you and I and anybody watching this, we have to behave as though everybody is a dangerous spreader of the virus. So we all have to live in fear of each other. We all have to stay 6 feet away from each other. It's illegal right now in Canada in most provinces to have a friend over for dinner. That's not allowed. Although you can meet up at a shopping mall and be less than 6 feet apart, nobody will notice, because the shopping malls are full. Sometimes churches are closed and restaurants are closed, but then the shopping malls are full. And instead of sitting down at a table, people stand side by side and they eat their burger together, because the tables in the shopping malls have been cordoned off with this crime scene yellow police caution tape. But the whole thing is founded on the notion of asymptomatic spread, and the Justice Centre is going to be challenging that in our court actions. We're going to have expert medical evidence and testimony, expert medical reports saying this is not true. There is some asymptomatic spread. Sometimes people, they're in the pre-symptomatic stage, so they are sick, but the symptoms aren't out yet. There could be a little bit of spread there. But there's no need for the entire population to be treated like vile, disease-bearing creatures, which is what the current lockdowns are based on. So that's another thing that the federal government will have to prove in court, that all of these measures are necessary. The onus is on them to show us the science that in their opinion, warrants massive violations of our freedom to move, to travel, to protest peacefully outside. And I'm not a fan. I don't think that looting and burning is legitimate free expression, but I do support, and the Justice Centre defends the right to peacefully, without violence, without property damage, to peacefully protest is a fundamental charter freedom. Our freedom of association. It was illegal over Christmas to spend time with friends and family at Christmas time, and now it's getting escalated to getting forcibly detained, and we have the government planning to censor internet speech. So I can't think of any charter freedoms that are left that are not either they have been violated or there is a threat to violate them, because up until now our freedom of expression has not been curtailed, but now the federal government's saying, oh, well, we got to curb that too. We have to stop the misinformation, which is incredible. It sounds nice. I mean, who isn't against misinformation, right? But the issue is, do you and I as responsible adults have the freedom and the human dignity to determine for ourselves what is true, what is false, what is good information, what is misinformation, what is hateful, what is not hateful, what is right, what is wrong? Do we not have, in a free society, you're an adult, you get to decide that. In a repressive regime or totalitarian state, the government decides on your behalf, for your own good, of course, to protect you from really bad ideas, to protect you from misinformation. So, it's always a good pretext. We have to save the people from misinformation, or we have to save the people from hurt feelings or from hatred. And this is where Canada's federal government is going.
That is precisely the point, and I've pointed it out increasingly in my work in recent years, although I think it's been a constant of the work that I do, is that, yes, they're from the perspective of the authoritarians, there's the infantilization of the public, who must be told what to think and what to do, and the prescribed limits of their reality, whereas I treat my audience as rational adult human beings who can make their own choices. I don't tell them what to do or what to think. I present information that is theirs to do with as they please. And anyone who would seek to come in between myself and other rational adult human beings in an exchange of ideas is an authoritarian and a tyrant by definition. And all of the precedents you list there, I suppose, are relevant, but they're not exactly the type of precedents that I think the Canadian government would like to point to. Oh yes, well, when we interned those Italian Canadians or those Japanese Canadians, yeah, that gives us the right to do it in this context. They would never point to those precedents because they are so disgusting, and we understand that the finger of history has been pointed at those as blemishes on the Canadian record, not some sort of great shining example of what the Canadian government can do. Which I suppose begs the fundamental question of all of this, which is, for the underinformed Canadians in the crowd, or for people internationally who might not know, what is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and how has this magical piece of paper not magically protected people from being detained by their government?
I love the question. Freedom exists ultimately in the human heart, the human mind, the human spirit. Now, there's a lot of really healthy debate that has taken place and will continue to take place about the shift that Canada made in 1982. We shifted from a British system of parliamentary sovereignty, where basically if you didn't like a law, your recourse was the democratic process. So write to your MP and say you want the law changed, and if the MP is not going to do it, well then, vote him out next election and vote in somebody better. But you could not, prior to 1982, in Canada, you could not go to court and get a judge to rule that a law was unconstitutional and strike it down. That's a U.S. system that they've had for well over 200 years. And so in the United States, you can go to court and say, well, the American Constitution or the state constitution or both, they protect my freedom of speech, my freedom of religion, so on and so forth. And you have judges striking down laws or upholding laws. So what Canada did in 1982 is we switched, with the adoption of the Charter and making that part of our Constitution, we switched from a British-style system of parliamentary sovereignty to an American-style, what's called a constitutional democracy. And so this is where the courts play a role in the laws, and a court, an unelected, unaccountable judge can strike down a law as unconstitutional. Now, I think we have less freedom today with the Charter than what we did in 1982. I'm not sure if that's because of the Charter necessarily. So my point is this: the really big issue is, do people understand freedom? Do they love freedom? Do they cherish freedom? Do they actually want to live in a free society? And if people are not that fond of it, and they are, they like being told what to do and what to think, and some people are like that. They don't want the responsibility of having to think a lot and make decisions. And a lot of people are quite happy. They flick on the 6 o'clock news and they listen to their chief medical officer and they accept every word that she says as gospel truth. There's just no questioning that, well, maybe, things like, the issue of asymptomatic spread. I mean, where is the science on that? I have asked the Alberta government, show me the science that you rely on for your belief that asymptomatic people are dangerous spreaders of the virus. Show me the science. You get no answer. I can give you dozens of examples of questions I've asked. You get no answer at all. And so the fundamental problem really, you could say that the government violations of the Charter are maybe symptoms of a deeper problem where people have become so accustomed to comfort and convenience and just kind of living their own lives. And a lot of people don't care about freedom because a lot of Canadians, I'm sad to say, they support all of this stuff, every lockdown measure. You hear comments like, well, those people shouldn't have been traveling anyway. Why do you need to leave Canada? It's like, because I'm a human being and I'm an adult and I believe in freedom. And so if I want to leave Canada, I should be able to do that. And I should be able to come back to Canada without, okay, fine, have a passport check at the border, but I should be able to return to my own country without having to put aside $2,000 and spend 3 days locked up somewhere.
Again, I don't know how to explain that to people who don't fundamentally understand it. If you don't understand how important what is happening right now is, I would say you probably never will.